Hello and welcome to today's lesson. We're going to be going over questions that are found in the Study Island lesson, Rational Functions, and also questions that are from the topics in Algebra 2 from the Standards 2.7 A, B, C, and D. And so what I've done is I've just gone into Study Island and pulled out example questions that can be done solely on the TI-84 or with very, very minimal paper pencil work and then using the graphing calculator. So as I'm going through these problems, it's a great idea to be taking notes, especially on the steps of the buttons that I push, so that you're able to look back on those and be able to try these problems on your own to practice for when you're taking your EOI. And so it's really good to know how to do these problems paper and pencil also, but this is a great way to check yourself. And you're given this calculator as a tool on the screen of the EOI, so it's always good to know how to do these questions using that tool and be able to take advantage of it also. In this first problem, I'm just seeing which one of these answers, which one of these functions matches the graph above. So I'm going to go into y equals to start this problem, and I'm going to clear out anything that's remaining there. And I'm going to type in the first rational function in choice A. To get a fraction, I'm going to go into Math, scroll over so that Num is selected, and then I'm going to use the up arrow to go to the very last choice, or you could down arrow through all of them. And here, numerator over denominator is the one that I'm looking for. So I'm going to press Enter, and there it gives me a fraction to fill out. So I'm going to put 2x minus 1 on the numerator, and then x in the denominator. And I'm using this button here beside alpha to get my x. And so then I'm going to do zoom standard because it's going to give me a graph that both of the x and y axis start at -10 and go to +10. So I don't have to mess in the window to get the screen to be the same. And so here, this one, it's coming straight across around, it looks like 2, and then it cuts up right by the y-axis. And then this one, it's coming up by the y-axis, and then cuts over at about 2 on the y-axis, which is what it looks like it does in the problem also. So A is looking like a pretty high contender for my answer. But it's always a good idea to roll out everything else. So I'm going to go back into y equals and this time put in b. So the numerator I don't have to change, just the denominator. I'm going to put x plus 1 there, and then I'm going to press graph. And here it cuts up before the y-axis in the first part, and it starts in the second part before the y-axis. So that doesn't look the same, so it's not going to be b. And then I'm going to go into y equals and type in c. And I'm going to use the delete button to delete out the denominator and just put an x. And then I press graph. And here, they look pretty similar. But if I pay close attention to how sharply this is increasing, you can see that it doesn't this graph here, it increases pretty sharply. Whereas this one, it's not nearly as sharp. It's a bit more curved. So C is not going to be an answer. And then I try out D for the last one. And D, once you try it out, you'll see that it doesn't work either. So that's going to make A my final answer. This next question asks you to solve the equation, and anytime you solve an equation graphically, the first step is to set it equal to 0. So I've just rewritten this equation over here on the paper, and I'm going to subtract the left side from both sides. So I'm going to rewrite that whole fraction the way that it is. And over here, the denominators are different, so I can't subtract them. I'm just going to rewrite that whole thing as it is with no changes. But here, these cancel out, and now it's set equal to 0. And so I can enter this into y equals in order to find the answer. So I'm going to go into y equals and clear out what I have there and type in this new equation. So I'm going to go to Math, scroll over to Numbers, and choice D, and type in 5 plus x in the numerator, and use the down arrow to go to the denominator, and plus 10, and then right arrow, minus, and then back to Math, number, that last choice, and type in 84 over 10x, using my arrows to navigate the fractions. Looking at my answers here, I can see that the x is from anywhere from negative 24 to positive 24. And where I'm going to get my answers is along that x-axis. So I'm going to go into Window right here and set my x-axis to be from negative 25 to positive 25. So I can see where any of those possible answers are. And I'm going to leave the y-axis alone because I don't need to see as high up. And so I'm going to press Graph. And there, I'm looking for my solutions along the x-axis, and I can see it crosses the x-axis twice, and so I'm going to need to calculate what those x-intercepts are. And there's two ways that you can do that. The first way is to use the Calc button here to find the x-intercept. So I'm going to press Second Calc, and I'm going to choose choice 2 because 0 is a synonym for x-intercept. And so I'm going to move my cursor, and you can see it blinking here using the right and left arrows so that it's on the left side of the first x-intercept. And then I'm going to press Enter. And it's there, so I press Enter. And then I'm going to use the right and left arrows to move it on the right side of that first x-intercept and press Enter. And then it says Guess, so I'm going to move it as close to the actual intercept as possible and press Enter. And there it tells me that the x-intercept is negative 12. So that means negative 12 is going to be one of my answers. And that's only in choice A, so that means negative 12, or choice A is probably going to be my answer, but it's always good to double check the other one too. So I'm going to repeat that using Second Calc, choice 2 for 0, and then I'm going to move the arrow so it's on the left side of this x-intercept. And so I'm going to have to move it, and there it shows up on the left side, and I press Enter, and then using those left and right arrows, I move it to the right side because it's asking for the right bound. Press Enter, and then Guess, I'm going to move it as close as possible to right over top of that x-axis, or x-intercept, and press Enter. And there it tells me the other one is 7, so my answer is going to be A. And the other way you can do this, and just pick one way that you're most comfortable with, is using the table. So I'm going to go to Table Set, and I'm going to tell the table to start at 0 and to go by 1s in the X column. So then I'm going to go Second Table, and if I look, I need to look at the table where X is 7, 14, negative 12, positive 12, and then positive and negative 24. And if those are the answers, there will be a 0 across from it in the Y column. So if I look at negative 12, there is a 0 there, whereas the negative 14 there wasn't. So that's why it couldn't have been D, because there wasn't a negative 14. And then if I scroll down to 7 on the table, there's a 0 there also. So that means 7 is the other answer. So I just verified that A is the correct answer. So number 4 asks us to find a vertical asymptote. Remember, a vertical asymptote is a vertical line that the graph gets closer and closer to but never crosses or touches. And so on your X and Y axis, a vertical line is going to cut through the x-axis, so that means your answer for a vertical asymptote is always going to be x equals a number. So knowing that piece of information already eliminates A and B because it's y equals a number. So a vertical, if you take a V for vertical and another V upside down underneath of it, that creates an x. And so that can help you remember that x equals a number is the equation format for a vertical asymptote. And so here I'm going to define the actual vertical asymptote now that we understand what that is. I'm going to go into y equals and in y1 type this function that I'm given. So that means I'm going to go into Math, scroll with the right arrow to number, and then go to that last choice so that D is selected and press enter, and that gives me a fraction to fill in. I'm going to put a 1 in the numerator, down arrow to the bottom, and put 4x minus 6 in the denominator. And then I'm just going to go ahead and do zoom standard, so since everything is between -10 and +10 here. And I can see here there is a vertical asymptote. This right line right here is where they're getting closer and closer to, and it's something in the positive x, kind of small. So to actually see the positive, or to see the vertical asymptote, I need to use the table function. But first I want to set the table up correctly. Here I'm going to have it start at 1 because it's a small positive number, but because the fractions here end in 2, the denominator is a 2, that means I need to have it go by halves. So I'm going to type in 1 divided by 2 to tell it to go by halves. And so now that I have the table set up correctly, I'm going to press second table. And for a vertical asymptote, you're going to want to write this down. You're going to look for where it says error in the Y column. So for a vertical asymptote, look for where it says error in the Y column. And so here, there, across from 1.5 is where it says error. So I'm looking for x equals 1.5. And so if you're not sure which answer choice here in fraction form is equivalent to that, you can go to the home screen, so second quit, type in 1.5, go to math, go over to number, and then choice B here converts it from a fraction to a decimal. So I'm going to type in B. And there, it took it from 1.5, the decimal, and converted it to the fraction 3/2. So I can see that this is the same as x equals 3/2, which is choice D. This time for number 5, I'm looking for a horizontal asymptote. So a horizontal asymptote is a horizontal line that cuts through the y-axis. And so a horizontal asymptote is going to be y equals a number. And so if you take this h and you flip it upside down, it looks like this, which almost looks like a y. So that can help you to remember that y equals is what the form of a horizontal asymptote looks like. So right away, I know that C can't be a choice. So I'm going to go ahead and start this problem off the same as a vertical asymptote, and I'm going to put this equation of a rational function into y1. So I'm going to go into math, over to number, and choose choice D to set up my fraction. A 1 in the numerator, down arrow to the denominator, and put in 3x minus 8. And then I'm going to press zoom standard to graph it. And here I can see that there is a horizontal asymptote. And it kind of looks like this graph gets closer and closer and closer to the x-axis and never actually touches it though. And so that kind of tells me that maybe it's getting closer and closer and closer to where y is equal to 0. And so to confirm that, I need to go to the table, but first I need to set up the table correctly. So when I'm looking at a horizontal asymptote, I know it's a small number. I'm going to have it started at small numbers, so I'm going to leave it at 1. But horizontal asymptotes, I'm going to set the table to go every 50. And now I'm going to look at the table, and I'm looking at the y column, and as I go up the y column, what does this number get closer and closer to but never actually reaches? And so here I can see this number is getting teeny, 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 tiny, tiny, but never actually getting to 0. And if I go down the y column, which I have to use the cursor on the x to scroll down, and I go to the negative numbers, I can see that it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller, or closer and closer to 0, but it never actually touches 0. So that tells me that the horizontal asymptote is 0, and that means y equals 0 is going to be my final answer, which is D. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you learned something new.